my name's Christine. Welcome to episode 4 of my podcast, Unmuzzled at 67. Before we begin, I just want to make you aware that we are talking about quite a dark time in my life in this episode, and there are references to mental health and suicide. So if this is something that you feel sensitive to, it might be something you want to leave for the time being. If not, let's begin. Last time we were talking about how I'd reached the age of finding work, which in those days for me was at 15, and that I had actually found what I thought was going to be the job of my dreams, which was working as a beauty consultant in Lewis's. So let's continue. And if you're sitting comfortably, let's begin. So here I was, ensconced in glamour from 9 till 5. The women were fabulous, except my boss, who was a goody two-shoes and didn't take a drink. The only person, of course, in the whole department. But for the rest of us, Friday nights, party nights. And, you know, when I think back on this now, it's so funny, but it was serious at the time that in order that we didn't get too drunk and stay out too late, we would say to each other, look, what we'll do is we'll go out with our uniforms on. That'll mean we won't stay out late. Aye, right. Because every Friday night, stroke Saturday morning, you could be finding us in spankies dancing the morning away at 2 o'clock. Our intention of going out just for one never came to anything at all, but for some odd reason, we just kept it up. So there were all these women working for all these different companies, all super glamorous. Not so much at the end of the night, of course, but at the beginning, diving about with their uniforms on, drunk as anything. So this was definitely the life for me. I had made a great decision here. And amazingly, everybody turned up for their work on the Saturday. So we were hard-working women. Our motto was, work hard, play hard. But not only were these women beautiful, they were funny and they were hardcore. And we all had to work hard. We all needed the commission. Some of them had families, but most of them were young and wild and free. But we still needed the commission to pay for and to fund these nights out, because what started off as Friday nights soon became Saturday nights as well, and sometimes Mondays too. And these had to be funded one way or another. And I have to say, I was at that moment the happiest I've ever been. So my local, if you like, because I worked in the town, was a pub called Waves, which was on the Clyde side. And I was in there one day with my friend Irene, and we met these two guys. One was small and quite cheeky, and the other one was tall and quiet. And through a conversation, the wee one says to me, aye, that's us just out the big house. Just last week there. So for anybody who doesn't know what the big house is, it is, of course, Stirling Jail. Now, this guy's got my attention. Danger, excitement, couldn't resist it. So I got off with him that night, and many more nights in the future as the weeks went on. But within 3 months, he'd given me VD. And I couldn't go to my family doctor with VD. And if you lived in Glasgow and any of the social scenes that I belonged to, the only place that you could go was the infamous Blackstreet Clinic. It's not there now, but it was kind of round about the back of Buchanan Street bus station, which I think might be loosely the Townhead area. And this place was known as the place to go to get VD treated. So it was one of these situations where you were mortified, obviously, but you had to go. You had to phone up, make your appointment, and you had to go. And you just were kind of walking down the street, and you could, of course, if you couldn't find it, you couldn't ask anybody because it'd be far too embarrassing. You're just kind of looking at the street, and of course, the wee kids that lived in the local housing estate, they all knew exactly what Blackstreet was for. So they would be circling you with their bikes, shouting, "You've got a dose," or "You've got the clap." Mortifying. But still, it just had to be done. So I wanted to talk for a minute about that mortification, but how, when you walked into the clinic, there was what I came to call the Blackstreet community, because there was people in there that were anything but mortified. In fact, it seemed to be a meeting place for people. And once you were inside, it was quite an upbeat attitude. People were saying, "Oh, Margaret, Howard, you have not seen you for a while." See, men, they're bastards. And "Oh, they're Moira. Moira, is that you?" And I get me and all. So there was this kind of a camaraderie where, people like me were just sitting with their heads down and they didn't want to get involved in any kind of conversations. But of course you would. People would say to you, these women, "What's your name, hen? What you here for? Oh, you don't know. Is this your first? Oh, it's your first time. Aye, aye. It's fine. It's fine, hen. We're here all the time. Don't worry about it. You'll be absolutely fine." So there was there was this sense of being part of the club that you never wanted to be a part of. And I think it kind of loosened some of the nerves. And I had to go, obviously, several times. So I kind of got used to that kind of community thing. And then people saying, "Oh, Christine, how is that? You back? What's that? Your third visit, your fourth?" Aye, I know. It takes a while, all that kind of stuff. So I kind of lost my mortification quite early and did become part of the Blackstreet Clinic community side, but only for a short space of time. So, but although it was mortifying, it had to be treated. There was nothing else you could do. But this is interesting. So when I said to Tam, the guy that's just out Berlin, "Listen, do you know that I've had to go to Blackstreet? You gave me VD," and this is what he said. "Oh, aye, that's right. It's murder in it." And that was Tam. There was no sense of being sorry or apologising. That wasn't it. That wasn't it. And in another few months, he just dumped me. He failed to tell me that he had a fiancée and that his fiancée had fallen out about it, had found out about us, and he was now petrified that he was going to lose her because of me. And it was quite funny how he'd never mentioned that ever before. But I guess if I'm going to be honest, he would, it wouldn't have made any difference. I just would have been up for it anyway. So now Tam was worried. He was having to pull all the stops out. He was having to try everything he could to woo this woman back, the woman that he loved. So Tam was a person who had no fear. He had no fear of anything or of any situation. And probably that's what attracted me to him. But he was insane. He was absolutely mental. But maybe that was part of his charm. Or maybe that just shows you how mental I was to be hooked in by that. So sometimes when I look back, I don't really know what was going on with me, because on the one hand, I was really enjoying my job. I was enjoying the company of the women, not just the boozy nights out, but, there was a nice camaraderie where we worked. And as I say, we all worked hard and we had a lot of fun during the day. But somehow Tam, this mental ex-con who didn't want me, made me feel as if I was just a piece of rubbish that is to be put into a bin now that I had been used. I, I don't know. I mean, I just can't recall exactly why it would be that had such a major effect on me. And probably when I think about it, I was so hard-faced around him and so gallous around him that he probably thought that I wasn't even really that bothered anyway. As always, outside confidence 10, inside confidence 0. But it really did hit me hard. And I don't know, looking back, if it sort of resurfaced that experience I'd had when my father rejected me, the only man that I ever had loved and cared for. I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. But my overall feeling was of complete worthlessness. Even an ex-con who was absolutely mental didn't want me. Who was going to want me? Why was I so unwantable? Who knows what was going on through my mind? We'll never know. But that was the night I decided that life wasn't worth living. And I sat and planned how I was going to kill myself. So I got myself a wee carry out on the way home, and I'd raided the bathroom cabinet of anything that I could find. And sadly, I sat in my bed and I sobbed and I sobbed. And I had to be quiet because I didn't want to wake up my mum and dad, or they would come asking what was wrong. So I thought I had meticulously planned this, that I would be dead by the time my mum would come and try and wake me up. And that's not what happened. Apparently what happened was when she tried to wake me, I was unconscious. An ambulance was phoned. I was taken to the local A&E, and I was just about coming to when I could feel this red tube stroke pipe that for me was actually ribbed, being pushed down my throat to pump my stomach out. I need to add that this red pipe stroke pump tube thing, not pump, tube thing, just ripped out nearly all the skin in your throat when it was all being pulled out again when the job was done. My own reaction was, no, I'm alive. It's not what I wanted. This wasn't a cry for help. I really wanted to die. So I was put in a general ward with nurses who made their contempt for me quite obvious, didn't hide it, and they had as little to do with me as possible. I couldn't care less. I was too out of it. And after a stern telling off from the doctor and a few days in hospital, I was sent home. I was sent home to silence and more rejection. None of my parents would even look at me, and I was kept in my room, excuse me, with no visitors allowed. And although my friends at work were phoning to see how I was, no messages were passed on, and they were told I had the flu and I was in bed. I was not allowed out of my room. I had to stay in my room all the time. And the only person that I saw during that time was my mum. She brought me in some food and took away the trays. She never spoke to me, she never looked at me, and she never asked how I was. So the day before I was due to go back to work, I must have decided to have a second attempt. And so again, I think I must have taken some booze out the gold room. I honestly can't remember. But I did the same thing again. And I thought that I had meticulously planned things, well, a lot better this time, so that this attempt would be more successful. But it wasn't. And the same thing happened again. Same routine, ambulance called, taken to A&E, sorry, red tube put down my throat, back to the same ward, back to the same nurses, and everything was the same. But there was a different outcome. A senior doctor had a meeting with myself and my mum because I was under 18, and he was kind. That was the first kindness I'd experienced. But he wanted to get to the bottom of why I had done this twice. Of course, I was saying nothing, and so a psychiatrist was appointed to me. And in the 70s, that was quite the word psychiatrist and your child's name in the same sentence, I think, would have been horrific. So a psychiatrist was appointed to me, and an appointment was made for me and my mum to attend at the psychiatric outpatients. I couldn't take it all in, but my mum did. She was beyond rage, and she just went for me all the way home, saying I was selfish. I was only thinking of myself. What I had done to my family was unforgivable. There was no way back for me. The damage I had done to our reputation would not be fixed easily, and I was not her daughter. So back to the old routine. Silence. No one speaking to me. Nobody asking me how I was. I was just worn down by it. I kind of just gave in. And if you can think that in those days, there was no TVs in bedrooms then, so the only bit of company you would have would be a book. But I was exhausted by the whole ordeal, and there was no fight left in me. But the dreaded day came when my mum and I had to go and see the psychiatrist. He was asking me a lot of questions about my upbringing, very intense. And after about 20 minutes of that, he concluded that my mother had spoiled me. She did everything for me. Therefore, I couldn't deal with the ups and downs of life. And he hinted that my mum had more than her part to play in this. She would not accept any responsibility or blame and told the psychiatrist it was him that was needing help. But what happened next was worse than I could have ever imagined. So the psychiatrist said to me, "Come with me, I want to show you something." So I went with him along this corridor. And my overriding memory is of the terrible smell in hospitals in those days, which was a sort of a antiseptic Dettol mixed with sickness kind of smell. And I think probably people who worked there, it took them a long time to get used to it. But he took me along this corridor and he opened this door. And inside this huge room were large size cots. So you would probably say they were cots for adults. There's nobody in them. There's nobody in the cots. So he took me inside this room and he said to me, "See if you do this again. This is where I'm going to put you. I'm going to make sure that you are committed in here and that I will have the say in what happens to you. Your parents will not be involved at all. Whatever happens to you will be down to me. So you think hard on that this is what awaits you. And also, don't forget that if that happens, this will be on your medical certificate for the rest of your life. So this is something that you will have to take with you through the rest of your life." So I was horrified, shocked, and then he walked out the door, shut it and locked it, and he left me inside. So whilst there was nobody there in the room, just the smell and the thought of being surrounded by what could await me was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And I was banging the door to let me out, and I was screaming and crying and shouting. And finally, he came back, opened the door. I just ran out. I was tears and snorters and sobbing. And he said, "I hope you've had time to think on that, young lady, because what you've done is very serious. And what I've said to you is, in fact, what will happen. I have that kind of authority." So we go back to the office. I'm shaking. I'm horrified by what I've just been told. And my mother's sitting there, you know, her fur hat on, saying, well, what did you think of that? Eh? What did you think of that when he told you that? That should stop you in your tracks. And I kind of realised that these two had kind of somehow made some kind of pact or made some agreement to frighten the shit out of me, because my mother must have thought that was the only way to stop this in its tracks. And to be honest, she was right. It was the only way that it could be stopped in its tracks. But that was more or less the end of the meeting. I never was asked to go back. And my huge memory of that day is just my mother just, you know, constantly going on to me about, you know, what I'd done to the family and how ashamed of me she was, and saying things like, I mean, I know women that work in this hospital. What am I going to say if I bump into any of them? And that was definitely seemed to me to be her biggest worry. She would say things like, I mean, you're just mental. I mean, there's nothing like that on my side of the family. You must be from your father's side. I just don't recognise any of this. So she was just washing her hands of me in no uncertain terms at all. And I have to be honest and say to you that experience haunted me for, what age would I be then? 16. So 20 years. When something else happened that made me immediately reflect on, God, I can't go to the doctors with this because it will be on my medical record that I've tried to commit suicide twice, and that's not going to look good for me. So this did have a really long-lasting effect. And, you know, I don't know, I'm not saying that everybody got treated like that in the 60s. How could I possibly, the 70s rather, how could I? I don't know about other people's experience, but I only know about mine, and I only know about the lack of any understanding and the lack of any kindness or compassion. That is what I can say today. And the all-round effect of that was my parents and the psychiatrist certainly got what they wanted, but I also got what I didn't want. It just made things worse. Things just were worse. So that was that, done and dusted. And so I think maybe another week off work and then back to work and forgotten about. It was never discussed in my house again. It was never brought up again. But I certainly was more estranged from my family than ever before. I was held completely responsible of being selfish, not considering the family and what my actions had caused. And I was grounded for a month. My parents didn't want to take their eyes off me, so there was no boozing when I went back to work. It was all very quiet. And to be honest with you, it took me quite a while to get over that, so probably I was quite grateful. And my parents couldn't cope with any more dramas, so I was watched all the time. Respectability was all that counted. No one ever asked how I was. And as I said, it was never, ever taken, it was never discussed again. And it took my mum and dad years to get over this and to warm to me again. And I would say that I truly was on the outside looking in now. I think there are things that can happen in your life that change you and you never change back to who you were before that. And I think that probably that was my time. So I have to finish there. It's a bit of a grim note, I know, but it is part of my story. There is recovery. There is something. Life does move on after this, but it had to be included in the story, I guess. So let's look forward to something less traumatic and different next time. So thanks for joining me today.